Author Charles Swindoll makes these observations about the year 1809. He said, "The international scene was tumultuous. Napoleon was sweeping through Austria. Blood was flowing freely, and nobody cared about babies. But the world was overlooking some terribly significant births." He went on to say that same year, Alfred Tennyson was born to an obscure minister and his wife, and that child would one day greatly affect the literary world. On the same day in the American continent, Edgar Allan Poe began his eventful, albeit tragic, life. It was also the same year that the physician named Darwin and his wife named their child Charles Robert, and the same year produced the cries of a newborn infant in a rugged log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky. The baby's name, Abraham Lincoln. And so if there had been news broadcasts and headlines of that time, I'm certain that the words would have read, "The destiny of the world is being shaped on an Austrian battlefield." But history was actually being shaped in cradles that year in England and America. Now, in the Bible, the headlines about the time that we just read would have been talking about taxation, about registration, and about the rule of Quirinius when Jesus was being born. And instead, the news was of a young Jewish woman and her fiance carrying the biggest news of all. So this Advent, as we prepare for the headline story in our Christian faith, the birth of the babe lying in the manger, we start with Joseph. We start at the very beginning in the Gospel according to Matthew. Now, we can't have a story without Joseph. Sally Buffington took this picture and sent it to me this week. So the story starts with Joseph and his lineage, and we normally skip over this part, not just because it's a tongue twister for our lay reader to have to read all those names, but because we just tend to skip over it. But it's that story that traces Jesus' lineage back through Joseph all the way to Abraham. And Joseph is not some bit player that we can do without for 50% off. In fact, he is central to the story, despite the fact that we actually don't know a whole lot about him. But we get a glimpse at him. We get a glimpse that he is righteous. Now you have to imagine with me and put your mind in the day in which this story was taking place, and imagine that you were finding out that your fiance was pregnant and you were not married. Now, this was something that you could send the woman to death for. That was what you did. It wasn't just popular, that was just the standard procedure. Your fiance is pregnant, you send her to death. So Joseph, the impression we get of Joseph is that he's righteous, and he's going to do kind of an amazing thing by dismissing her quietly and not sending her to death. So that's pretty remarkable right there. But that's not the end of the story. This is where it starts to get interesting, and the angel appears and shakes things up. And in typical angel behavior says, "Do not be afraid." Now we have to imagine that the do not be afraid part is like, don't be afraid I'm waking you up in the middle of the night here. Don't be afraid that you might be hearing and seeing things. But more importantly, don't be afraid of what I'm about to tell you. And we know, because we know this story, this part of the story we know and are familiar with. We know that Joseph does indeed take Mary to be his wife. Despite all evidence to the contrary, all societal expectation to the contrary, he goes ahead and does what would not have been common, which might have been sort of socially damaging to him in his career, and he weds his pregnant fiance. And his life is transformed. Now, we later come to know that Joseph is the one who raises Jesus, the baby boy born to change the world. And he's the one who protects him from the corrupt political world and takes him and Mary and flees to Egypt to avoid the slaughter of all the 2-year-olds, which he wouldn't have had to do if he had dismissed her, right? Wouldn't have had to leave. We can imagine that he's the one who teaches young Jesus to care for those around him, to be raised up in the Jewish faith, to do all those other things that fathers do. Without Joseph, we might not be here today, awaiting the birth of Jesus. Without Joseph, Jesus might not have grown up to be the one who hangs out with outcasts and who teaches anyone who would listen about the realm of God. Without Joseph, who knows what would have happened to Mary, an unwed woman, pregnant, in a day and time when that doesn't usually go well. The angel of God appeared to Joseph, and his world was forever changed. The question is, do we allow ourselves to encounter God? Maybe not in a do not be afraid angel kind of a moment, but do we allow God to forever change us? Do we allow our paths to be changed from what we thought might happen? Darwin and Lincoln and Poe and everyday ordinary babies, they change the world. Babies, be them famous or just everyday babies, change the world. Jesus came as a babe, changed Joseph, and changed the world. Babies, all babies, bring us hope. That hope that the future will be different, hope that change is possible, hope that justice will reign, hope that peace will prevail, that joy will abound. So this Advent, as we ready ourselves for the birth of Jesus, ready ourselves to be changed. Do we ready ourselves to be hope-filled, to be joy bearers, to be love sharers, to bring peace? That's what we ready ourselves to do. May it be so. Amen.